Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really significant topic, trauma. Specifically, how it impacts our brains, our minds, and crucially, our bodies.
That's right. We're drawing insights mainly from The Body Keeps the Score, specifically excerpts from a YouTube audiobook. The author has, I believe, around 30 years of experience at a trauma center. Quite expensive.
Yeah, decades. And our mission here, for you listening, is to really pull out the key takeaways. How does trauma change us, physically and psychologically?
And importantly, offer some clarity and hope for healing without getting bogged down in, overly technical stuff. Make it understandable.
Okay, sounds good. So let's start at the beginning. Trauma happens. What's the immediate fallout in the brain, in the body?
Well, right away you get disturbed brain circuits, things firing differently, and a huge flood of stress hormones washes through the system.
A flood, okay. And that translates to?
Intense negative feelings, obviously, but also very real physical sensations like your heart pounding, maybe shaking, tension, and sometimes impulsive actions that feel, well, out of your control.
So it's this powerful full body reaction, not just in your head.
Exactly, and that's key. It can feel so overwhelming, so completely confusing for the person experiencing it.
I can imagine. Leading to that fear, maybe, that something is fundamentally wrong with them?
Precisely. That they're broken or damaged beyond repair. It's a terrifying feeling.
It makes me think about how our understanding has shifted. I remember being fascinated by medicine. Early on, the body seemed so logical, you could map it out.
Right.
But the mind, mental health, it felt more abstract, less understood back then.
That really mirrors the author's early career experiences. The complexity of the mind versus the, let's say, limited tools they had for understanding psychiatric issues.
But things have changed. Neuroscience, other fields.
Hugely. Neuroscience, developmental psychopathology, interpersonal neurobiology, these fields have been, well, game changers. They've shown us how trauma physically leaves its mark.
So the big takeaway is trauma causes actual physiological changes in the brain. It's not just a memory or a feeling.
Absolutely. It's biological.
Yeah.
The brain's alarm system, the amygdala primarily, gets recalibrated. It becomes hyper-alert to danger.
Always on edge.
Yeah. Stress hormone activity stays high. The way the brain filters information changes what it pays attention to.
And didn't the author mention something about the part of the brain related to feeling alive?
Yes, that's right. Trauma can compromise the function of the brain area that helps us feel present, grounded, basically alive in our own skin.
Wow. And the consequences of all these changes, what do they look like in everyday life?
Well, you see hypervigilance, constantly scanning for threats. It makes it hard to relax, to engage.
It's tense.
People often get stuck repeating the same problems, the same patterns, and there's a real difficulty learning from experience, even painful ones.
And the author makes a crucial point here, doesn't he? About blame.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's vital to understand these aren't moral feelings. They're not weaknesses.
Oh.
They are the direct result of the brain adapting to survive overwhelming experiences. Their brain changes.
But there's hope in that understanding, too, because brains can change.
Exactly. That's neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
The brain's amazing ability to adapt and rewire itself. If trauma can change it, then healing interventions can potentially change it back, or at least adapt in healthier ways.
So how do we do that? The author mentions 3 main avenues for healing.
Right. First, there's top-down. This is about talking, connecting with others, making sense of the trauma story, understanding it cognitively, like talk therapy.
Oh, okay. Thinking and talking it through.
Then you have medicine or technology, things like medication to help calm that overactive alarm system, maybe dampen the panic responses, or specific technologies aimed at reorganizing brain patterns.
That's neurofeedback, perhaps?
That would fall under that category, yes. And third, there's the bottom-up approach. This is really key.
Bottom up, meaning the body.
Exactly. Using the body. Experiences like movement, breath work, somatic therapies, things that give the body a felt sense, a visceral experience that contradicts the helplessness or rage or collapse felt during the trauma.
So physically feeling safe, physically feeling capable again.
Precisely. Creating new physical memories, essentially.
And for most people, it's not just one of these.
Usually not. Most survivors really benefit from a combination, tailored to their specific needs and experiences.
It's clear the author's perspective comes from deep experience. 30 years at a trauma center.
Immense experience. Treating thousands of people, adults, children with all kinds of trauma histories, those weekly treatment team meetings, the focus on tracking what works.
Yeah.
It speaks volumes.
And it wasn't just clinical work, right? There was research, too.
Oh, yes. They actively sought grants to study different treatments. Medication, sure, but also yoga, EMDR, even theater, neurofeedback, a really broad range.
Trying to figure out what actually helps people heal.
Right. The core mission was always twofold: care for patients and figure out through research how best to do that.
What would you say is the ultimate goal then, according to the author?
It's about helping people regain control, to feel like they're the masters of their own ship again, as the author puts it, to move beyond just managing symptoms.
And those physical experiences seem central to them.
They really are. Finding ways to physically experience something other than helplessness, rage, or collapse is often crucial for lasting change.
It's interesting that there isn't one single best treatment pushed.
No, and that's important. The author explicitly practices all the methods discussed and stresses that different things work for different people. No silver bullet.
So the book itself is like a guide, an invitation.
Both, I think. A guide to understanding the reality of trauma and an invitation for all of us individuals, society, to face it, explore treatments, and really commit to prevention.
The author starts the book very personally, with an event from their own childhood.
Yes, a significant experience at age 12. It really grounds the discussion, showing how trauma can just interrupt life's narrative.
And that sets up the professional journey, starting at a VA clinic in '78.
Right. First day, meets a Vietnam veteran they call Tom. Nightmares, emotionally numb. Classic symptoms we now recognize.
But Tom's story had a twist, didn't it, about the nightmares?
It did. He was afraid that taking medication, stopping the nightmares, would be like betraying his friends who died. He felt bound to them, stuck in that past.
Wow. Loyalty keeping him trapped.
And his father had a similar dynamic, seemingly living more for his fallen comrades than for his present life. It shows how trauma's grip can span generations almost.
Initially, the author's approach was, well, typical for the time.
Pretty much. Focus on the symptom, the nightmares, and prescribe medication. Better living through chemistry, as they put it.
But Tom refused.
Yeah. That refusal, based on loyalty, was a turning point. It made the author realize this was much deeper than just a symptom to be medicated away.
That pushed them to look deeper into past research.
Exactly. And that's when they found Abram Gardner's work from 1941, The Traumatic Neuroses of War, describing WWI vets with very similar issues: futility, withdrawal, detachment.
So this wasn't entirely new territory.
Not at all. Gardner had identified this constellation of symptoms decades earlier. He called it traumatic neurosis.
And he had a key insight about its nature.
A crucial one. He said the nucleus of the neurosis is a physioneurosis, meaning it's fundamentally physiological. It originates in the body's response. It's not just psychological, not just in your head.
Even back then, recognizing the body's role.
Yes. But, as the author notes, knowing that didn't necessarily provide clear instructions on how to help people like Tom heal. The practical guidance was limited.
Which meant learning had to come from somewhere else.
Absolutely. From the patients themselves and from mentors like Elvin Semrad. Semrad really emphasized learning from experience and warned about self-deception. The lies we tell ourselves, he called them.
Semrad sounds like a major influence.
Hugely. He stressed how hard it is for people in society to truly face the reality of trauma. Whether it's war atrocities, child abuse, domestic violence, there's often a deep reluctance to acknowledge it.
That societal reluctance. Sarah Haley wrote about that too.
Yes, specifically about the difficulty of talking about and truly listening to wartime horrors, and the intense shame survivors often feel, sometimes about their own actions or inactions during the trauma.
Shame seems incredibly powerful in the aftermath.
It really is. The author saw it in abuse survivors too. Shame related to survival actions, or the confusion when abusers are also caregivers, tangling up love and terror, pain and pleasure.
Going back to Tom's numbness, it wasn't just about connection to others.
No, it was profound. He couldn't feel love for his family, felt distant like living behind glass, but it also extended to himself, detached from his own life, his accomplishments.
Almost like watching himself from afar.
Exactly. And the Rorschach test showed something similar. Some vets saw nothing at all in the ink blots. Others just saw replays of their trauma with no flexibility, no imagination.
Which highlights how trauma impacts imagination itself.
Critically, imagination lets us envision possibilities, be creative, soothe ourselves, connect. Trauma can lead to this failure of imagination, this rigidity, which cuts off hope for a different future.
And it changes perception too, right? How they see the world.
Definitely. Everyday things, a certain type of person, a specific place can trigger intense fear or rage because they're unconsciously linked to the past trauma. The world feels different, more dangerous.
The situation at the VA back then sounds dire. Overwhelmed clinics, rising violence, suicide.
It was a crisis. The author tried to start a vet group just to offer something, but even getting funding was a battle.
They were told PTSD wasn't relevant to the VA's mission. Seriously.
Initially, yes. It shows how little understanding there was at an institutional level back then. Thankfully, that's changed significantly with dedicated resources now.
But that lack of understanding led the author to leave the VA.
Yes, in 1982, feeling the organization was disconnected from the reality their patients faced, moved to Massachusetts Mental Health Center, focusing on psychopharmacology.
Thinking maybe drugs were the answer after all.
Perhaps, but they quickly found similar issues there. Patients diagnosed with depression or anxiety would share stories of molestation, family violence. Trauma kept surfacing.
And a surprising pattern emerged with female patients.
Yes, a strikingly high number reported childhood sexual abuse. This flew in the face of the standard textbooks at the time, which claimed it was incredibly rare.
Textbooks minimize the impact of incest.
Shockingly so. One textbook even claimed father-daughter incest diminished psychosis and led to better adjustment, which was completely contrary to the devastating effects the author was seeing daily.
What were they seeing?
Effects remarkably similar to combat vets. Nightmares, flashbacks, rage, shutdown, relationship struggles. The source of the trauma was different, but the life-ruining impact was tragically similar.
So it became clear that trauma wasn't just about war.
Not even close. Violent crime, rape, child abuse, neglect, these are major sources of trauma in society. And trauma inflicted by caregivers during development is particularly damaging.
Looking back over the decades since meeting Tom, the understanding has exploded.
Enormously. Brain imaging, neuroscience. We can actually see what trauma does to the brain now. That's essential for understanding the damage and figuring out how to help repair it.
And understanding the inner felt sense has deepened too.
Yes, how overwhelming experiences disrupt our relationship with our own bodies, our physical reality. That core sense of self.
So the big point is, trauma isn't just something that happened back then.
Exactly. It's an imprint left on the mind, brain, and body that continues to affect how we survive and experience the present. It reshapes perception, thinking, everything.
And just finding the words, while important, might not be enough.
Often it isn't. Talking is meaningful, but it doesn't always change those automatic physical, hormonal responses. The body needs to learn viscerally that the danger is over, to live now.
Wow. So understanding trauma forces us to rethink the mind itself.
It absolutely does. How it's structured, how it heals. It's been a revolutionary journey.
The author then takes us back to the late 60s, witnessing a shift in psychiatry.
Yeah, at Massachusetts Mental Health Center again. A time of major change in how mental suffering was approached.
MMHC was a big deal, right? A top hospital.
Yes, leading reputation. And they were doing this key research comparing psychotherapy, the talking cure, mostly psychoanalysis then, with the new medications for first-break schizophrenia.
Psychoanalysis was king back then.
It was the dominant model for serious mental illness. But then came chlorpromazine, Thorazine, discovered in France, a whole new way of thinking about treatment.
And the author noticed something important during that time, these midnight confessions.
Right. Patients, often late at night, would share these incredibly traumatic histories, abuse, neglect, violence, things that often weren't part of the official morning rounds discussion.
Which hinted at a hidden reality.
Definitely. And later studies confirmed an extremely high rates of trauma in people seeking psychiatric care. It makes you wonder why it wasn't more central to the conversation earlier.
The focus seemed to be more on managing the surface.
It often felt that way. Managing symptoms like suicidality, self-harm, but less focus on the why, on the person's history, their life context.
Their strengths, hopes, relationships kind of ignored.
The ecology of their lives, as the author puts it, often got overlooked in that medical model approach.
There's a really striking anecdote about moonlighting, doing exams for electroshock patients.
Yeah, at a Catholic hospital, women getting ECT for depression would spontaneously share these deeply personal, painful stories about marriage, kids, guilt. And they'd feel better just being heard.
But knowing the ECT would likely wipe the memory of that conversation.
Heartbreaking. It really highlights the importance of being heard, but also the limitations of some treatments. It led the author to dig into older texts like Blehler's on schizophrenia from 1911.
Blehler wrote about hallucinations.
He did. He noted how schizophrenic hallucinations, especially sexual ones, could be incredibly graphic, mirroring every obscene and disgusting practice. He wondered if they might reflect real sensations.
Raising the question, could these be fragmented memories of actual trauma?
Exactly. blurring that line between imagination and memory. Can the mind invent physical sensations it's never felt? Where's the line between creativity and pathology? Deep questions.
And we know abused kids often have physical symptoms, right? Stomach aches, hearing voices.
Yes, further complicating things. Is it real? Is it a trauma response? It's often intertwined.
The atmosphere on the ward sounds like it was challenging, lots of intense behavior.
Very much so. Violent, bizarre, self-destructive acts, often triggered by feeling frustrated or misunderstood. Initially, the author didn't always grasp the why behind these extreme reactions.
And managing it often meant physical control.
Yes, relying on nurses' experience for when to intervene, sometimes with restraint or injections. The author even admits to a surprising feeling of satisfaction after restraining someone.
That's quite an honest reflection.
It highlights how much training focused on control, perhaps sometimes at the expense of deeper understanding or empathy.
The story about Sylvia and the forced feeding seems pivotal.
Deeply impactful. A young woman with a severe abuse history. The procedure felt to the author like a horrifying echo of sexual assault.
And that led to a personal rule.
A fundamental one. Don't do anything to a patient you wouldn't do to your own friends or kids. Always consider the potential for re-traumatization.
Even observations outside direct therapy were informative, like in recreation therapy.
Right. Noticing patients' physical awkwardness, rigidity, lack of conversational flow, it didn't fully click until later, after learning from body therapists like Peter Levine and Pat Ogden about how trauma gets held in the body.
So understanding the physical dimension came later.
Yes, it deepened significantly over time, despite the big names in research at MMHC like Candle. The author was drawn back for residency by the patients themselves.
And Semrad's influence continued to be strong.
Very strong. Discouraging textbooks initially, pushing for experiential knowledge, honesty about feelings, understanding suffering in relation to love and loss. His core belief: you can't heal without acknowledging what you know and feel deep down.
Including the body's reality.
Absolutely. He emphasized acknowledging the body, its visceral dimensions, but the field was shifting towards pharmacology.
The neurotransmitter revolution.
Exactly. Discovering norepinephrine, dopamine, huge excitement about targeting specific brain chemicals for specific disorders, hope for miracle drugs.
But that hope wasn't fully realized.
Not in the way initially envisioned, especially for complex issues like trauma. While meds can help, they weren't the simple fix some hoped for.
And the push for research precision led to the DSM.
Yes, the need for consistent diagnostic criteria for research studies was key. The author was even involved in developing those early criteria. These eventually became the basis for the DSM, the Bible of Psychiatry.
Though even the DSM creators acknowledged its limits.
Right. The intro to DSM-3 in 1980 explicitly mentioned its imprecision and cautioned against using it rigidly for legal or insurance decisions. A warning often ignored, unfortunately.
The author's interest in neuroscience kept growing, leading them to ACNP meetings.
Yes, searching for deeper answers about traumatic stress, and that's where they encountered Stephen Meyer's work on learned helplessness.
The inescapable shock experiments with dogs. Powerful stuff.
Very powerful. Dogs repeatedly shocked in locked cages. Later, even when the door was open, they wouldn't try to escape another shock. They just gave up.
A chilling parallel to how some traumatized people respond to adversity.
Absolutely. That feeling of why bother trying? After repeated, uncontrollable negative experiences. Getting stuck in helplessness.
And crucially, it wasn't just behavior, there were biological changes too.
Yes. The traumatized dogs had much higher levels of stress hormones. Strong biological evidence linking inescapable stress to physiological changes.
This connected with what others were finding in humans.
Definitely. Researchers like Southwick, Yehuda, Pittman were finding similar things, prolonged stress hormone secretion after trauma. And Yehuda's finding of paradoxically low cortisol in some PTSD was really intriguing.
Low cortisol. Isn't cortisol a stress hormone?
It is, but it also helps end the stress response, bring the body back to baseline. Low cortisol might indicate a malfunctioning feedback loop. The system isn't shutting off properly, leading to prolonged agitation and health issues.
The system stays on.
Right. The ideal is a quick response, then quick return to calm. In PTSD, that balance is often lost.
The author missed a plane to discuss this research. Shows how important it felt.
It really does. Meyer's work seemed to offer clues not just about the problem, but potential solutions.
And the key finding about how to help the dogs.
This was huge. The only way they found to get the traumatized dogs to escape again was to physically drag them out of the cage repeatedly. They had to experience successful escape physically.
Wow. So translating that to humans?
Could physical experiences, literally moving, taking action, help traumatized people regain that sense of control? Could physically enacting escape, even symbolically, make a difference?
A core idea for treatment, it sounds like.
A very central one for the author, yes. And other animal studies added more layers.
Like the mice returning to the unpleasant nest.
Right. Mice raised in stressful nests kept going back home, even when offered a much nicer place. That pull of the familiar, even when it's harmful.
Which mirrors people returning to abusive situations.
Sadly, yes. It raises that deep question. Why the pull towards the familiar, even if it's painful? And how do you help people attach to safety and pleasure instead?
Which leads into this difficult topic, addiction to trauma.
It's a complex observation. The author and a colleague noticed in vet groups that, despite the horror, recounting traumatic events sometimes seemed to energize the vets, make them feel more alive.
Like Chris Hedges' idea, war is a force that gives us meaning.
Exactly. That paradox where some traumatized people seem drawn to intensity, even negative intensity, because the alternative feels like emptiness or boredom.
They complain about feeling dead inside unless something intense is happening.
Yes. The case of Julia is a stark example. Raped, involved with a violent pimp, cycles of abuse. Even a normal relationship felt flat, and she returned to danger.
Freud talked about the compulsion to repeat, trying to master the trauma.
He did. But he also argues there's little evidence it actually leads to mastery. More often, it just leads to re-traumatization and more pain.
So maybe think about attractors. What pulls us makes us feel alive.
Right. Why are danger or pain attractive for some? Research on endorphins offers a partial clue.
Endorphins, the
Yeah.
body's natural opioids.
Exactly. Activities causing fear or pain can trigger endorphin release. Think of parachutists. Studies show their endorphin levels spike. Like getting morphine. Intense emotion can block pain, create a rush.
So re-exposure to stress might give a temporary hit or relief.
It's a plausible biological mechanism for some individuals, but it didn't fully explain Julia's complex situation.
Then came more neuroscience clues, specifically about the amygdala and serotonin.
Yes, Jeffrey Gray's work. The amygdala assesses threat. Serotonin levels seem to modulate its sensitivity.
How so?
Low serotonin was linked to being hyperreactive to stress, easily triggered, anxious. Higher serotonin seemed to dampen fear, reduce aggression, reduce freezing. This resonated with patients' exaggerated reactions.
And primate studies added another layer about social status.
Right. Dominant monkeys tended to have higher serotonin. Lose status, serotonin drops. Give low-ranking monkeys serotonin boosters, they might become more assertive, even take leadership. It shows this interplay between biology and social context.
The implication for trauma being?
Maybe some of the hyperreactivity and social difficulties in trauma are linked to serotonin dysregulation. And maybe interventions, not just drugs, but social ones too, could help by boosting serotonin naturally.
Like positive relationships, social connection, even touch.
Exactly. Highlighting again the body's role and our social environment's role in regulating our internal state.
This brings together several key dimensions for healing.
Yes, the author lays out four, really. Finding words. Calming the internal alarm systems, drugs, tech, reconnecting with the body, movement, touch, breath, and changing social conditions for safety and thriving.
Ignoring any of these limits, healing.
It does. It can leave people feeling passive, like just patients, rather than active agents in their own recovery and life.
So the big question remains, can we find more natural, holistic ways to help people manage trauma's aftermath beyond just medication?
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've seen how profoundly trauma impacts us physiologically, psychologically. It's not just in the mind, it reshapes the brain and body.
Yeah, understanding this biological underpinnings feels crucial, and recognizing the pathways to healing involve more than just talking.
Absolutely. For you, the learner, key takeaways might include remembering trauma has real biological roots. That concept of inescapable shock, how helplessness can become learned, physically ingrained.
And that complex relationship between trauma and behaviors that seem self-destructive but might have underlying biological drivers, like seeking intensity or the effects of neurochemistry.
Right. And also the journey of understanding treatment, the initial hope in medication, followed by the realization that often deeper, more embodied and relational approaches are needed too.
It makes you think, if our experiences shape our biology this deeply, well, how could a broader societal understanding of trauma change things? Not just individual therapy, but maybe public health, schools, even the justice system. If we truly grasped how trauma rewires people,